Hey, what's going on, people? Yeah, I know I'm late when it comes to talking about this topic, but hey, it's better to be late than never, right? Yeah, but a lot of people are already aware of the situation concerning the death of Tyre Nichols, right? I almost said Kyrie, Tyre Nichols, right? But just in case you guys didn't know about the situation, well, Tyre Nichols was a 29-year-old so-called black male living in Memphis, Tennessee. I think he's originally from Sacramento, California, but at the time he was living in Memphis, Tennessee when he was pulled over by police on January 7th, 2023, and according to video footage from police cameras and from surveillance cameras throughout that neighborhood, Tyre Nichols, when he was pulled over by police, he was pulled out of his car by Memphis police officers, and Tyre Nichols happened to run away from them. But then, but then, a few blocks away from when Nichols was pulled over, police caught him, and a fight ensued in which five Memphis police officers, who are now former Memphis police officers, beat the living crap out of him. And it was all seen in different footage, from the police body cam footage to neighborhood surveillance cameras when the beating took place. And the beating was so bad that Tyre Nichols ended up dying in the hospital 3 days after the incident, which would be January 10th, 2023. So, as a result of this incident, the Memphis police chief fired the five Memphis police officers that was involved in the beating of Tyre Nichols, and also about three more officers eventually got fired later on. Right now, according to the initial police report that was filed by, that was filed by one of the five police officers that put their hands on Tyre Nichols, they stated that Nichols was engaging in reckless driving. Right? They say he was reckless. He was driving recklessly, which is why they pulled him over. But according to a recent article from one of the officers that were fired, his name is Paul Hemphill or Peter Hemphill. I forgot his first name. I know his last name was Hemphill, but this Hemphill person was one of the officers that got fired from the Memphis Police Department. He admitted that Tyre Nichols was not engaging in reckless driving when he was pulled over by police. And not only that, but the police chief publicly stated that there is no proof substantiating the initial claim of the Memphis police officers, but now former police officers, alleging that Tyre Nichols was engaging in reckless driving. So it's just funny, as far as it's just a mystery as of right now, as far as what caused these former Memphis police officers to pull over Tyre Nichols. But in my opinion, right? Well, before I get to my opinion, I'll just say that recently, the five officers accused of, or the five former Memphis police officers accused of, who actually did beat Tyre Nichols, uh, they're going to be put on trial for the death of Nichols, in which the five of them are charged with a combination of second-degree murder, um, official misconduct, official oppressing, kidnapping, and aggravated assault. And if they're found guilty of second-degree murder, each officer can face up to 60 years in prison. Just for second-degree murder alone, they can face up to 60 years in prison. But in my personal opinion, I don't think these officers will spend that amount of time in prison if they're found guilty of these crimes. Now, I do believe these officers will be found guilty of at least one of these crimes and be sent to prison, right, by the state of Tennessee. But I don't believe that the degree of crime that they commit will be equal to the degree. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't believe that the amount of time that these officers will serve will equal the degree of crime that they committed. I believe they'll go to prison. They'll be found guilty and go to prison. And the main reason why I believe they'll be found guilty of at least one of these crimes was because, well, there's no way that these officers can use self-defense as justification for them to use that level of force on Tyre Nichols. You see, unlike a lot of other previous controversial police incidents where black males were the victim of a lot of officers, right? And a lot of these officers in the past, such as what's his Daniel Warren, who shot and killed Mike Brown in 2015 in Ferguson, Missouri, or Daniel Pentelio, the former NYPD officer who choked Eric Garner to death in 2014 in Staten Island, New York. Well, and other incidents as such, these officers were able to either not get indicted or found not guilty in the court of law for murder because they were able to utilize loopholes to claim that they were defending themselves. But in this specific case, right, in this specific situation with Tyre Nichols, when you look at the different camera footage of these officers beating Tyre Nichols, there is no way that these officers can utilize any loophole to justify what they did to Nichols, and they cannot say that they felt that their lives was threatened, thus they had to use force because Nichols was running away from the police right before he got his ass beat, thus did not pose as a threat to police, and that was caught on camera. So the camera footage showed that Nichols did not pose as a threat to the cops. Thus, based on that, I do believe that these cops will be found guilty for the crimes that they're accused of, but I don't think that the time that they'll serve would be enough to equal the level of crime that they did to Tyre Nichols, unless if the federal government steps in and decide to charge these officers for violating the civil rights of Tyre Nichols. Then the combination of punishment that these 5 former officers can receive from the federal government if found guilty, and also from the state of Tennessee if found guilty of the crimes that they committed. The combination of the years that they will spend in federal and state prison would, to a degree, match the degree of crime that they committed against Nichols. But personally, in my opinion, I believe that these 5 former Memphis police officers, the pathetic Scorpion unit, deserve something worse than prison time, if you know what I mean. Now, here's something funny, because when this situation first came out to the public, and you had a lot of people on social media who was talking about this situation, You always have these Uncle Sambo, these Uncle Sambo house nigga motherfuckers with this dumb rhetoric when they try to utilize situations like that and blame it on so-called black people as a way to deflect from the fact that the death of Nichols is just another example of corruption within the justice system. How corruption from the justice system enables corrupt police officers to do such crimes because these officers feel that they are able to get away with it, knowing that there's so many weaknesses within the justice system. So the argument, especially from bitch nigga Jason Whitlock, who went out on Fox News and stated that the incident that happened with Tyre Nichols, and I'm only paraphrasing what he said, and that's not what he said verbatim, I'm only paraphrasing. He said that the incident is an example or the fault of single black females. But whenever we have these situations where unarmed so-called black people have been assassinated by these corrupt police officers, you always have these so-called black people that want to turn around and deflect from acknowledging that this is an example, that these things are an example of corruption within the system that we live in and within the justice system, and trying to find a way to pin it on black people themselves. So when this time around, when it comes to Tyre Nichols, a lot of people point to the fact that the 5 officers who beat Tyre Nichols to death, a lot of people like to point out that the 5 former Memphis police officers who beat Tyre Nichols to death were black. And a lot of people use that and say, well, a Caucasian police officer was not involved in this time around. Okay. And how does that take away from the fact that this incident is just another example of corruption within the justice system? How the justice system has actually enabled these cops to do these types of things on its civilians. When you look at the video footages of what these 5 cops did to Tyre Nichols, anybody with any common sense can tell that these cops were used to doing that to people. Trust and believe. This is not the first time that these 5 former officers have done such a thing. Maybe what they've possibly have done before did not result in the death of someone. It probably did not go as far as what happened with Tyre Nichols. But don't be shocked if there is proof of these former officers, doing the same thing to other young black males. At the same time, they're protected by an entire justice system. They're protected by the city. Thus, the city enables these cops to keep doing these types of things and keep going to these extreme measures. But these motherfuckers on social media and Jason Whitlock, who want to play this deflection game, refuse to acknowledge that. They want to pin it all on so-called black people, when the issue of police misconduct, police murder, police brutality, it has way more to do than just so-called black people, regardless of the skin color of the cops who committed these acts. It has something to do with corruption within the justice system itself that needs to be resolved. How many times have we heard, whenever a so-called unarmed black person get their asses killed by police, right? We hear this bullshit about, what about Chicago? What about the crime in Chicago? What about, I'm like, Dude, what does crime in Chicago have to do with a police officer violating the rights of a civilian that they were sworn to protect? Huh? See, but this is a way for motherfuckers to try to pin, to trying to deflect from acknowledging that there's corruption within the justice system and trying to find a way to pin it on so-called black people. Just like when the whole George Floyd incident happened, and you still have people within the pathetic black manosphere who still claim that George Floyd died of a drug overdose and not by being choked, even though the medical examiners who performed the autopsy of George Floyd stated that he died from pressure being placed on his neck, thus preventing oxygen from entering inside of his body. In other words, Floyd died as a result of being choked to death. These are medical examiners who performed the autopsy on Floyd's body, not me. It's them saying that. But still, you got niggas in the pathetic black manosphere who will still say that Floyd died of a drug overdose. And they'll also trying to justify Floyd's death by saying that, well, he committed crimes in the past. What the fuck does Floyd's criminal past have to do with the fact that his rights or his constitutional rights was violated when Minneapolis police pulled him out of his car, knocked him down the floor, and choked the shit out of him? Come on now. You know, so-called black people, we have to stop playing this tap dancing game when it comes to so-called black people getting killed by police. Yes, we do know that so-called black on black crime is an issue. Well, common sense will tell you that so-called black on black crime is a totally different issue than police brutality, racial profiling, and police murder. Don't get me wrong. So-called black on black crime is a bad thing. And it's an issue that, of course, that needs to be addressed. But when a different issue is being addressed that's also just as bad, which is police murder and or police brutality, we should not be using so-called black on black crime to deflect from the fact that we unfortunately still live in a country that allows police to get away with committing these criminal acts on its citizens. And so-called black males in America need to be extremely, out of all groups of people, so-called black males in America in unison, we need to be extremely vocal and organize together more than any other group to actually fight for a complete reformation of the justice system in America and totally reform the police. And I've made a video about a similar topic about 2.5, 3 years ago, in which I believe that we need to fight to make police brutality, police murder, and racial profiling a federal crime. You know, don't get me wrong. There's times where, you know, what we've seen recently, especially with the whole George Floyd incident, is that we have the federal government who investigate these situations to see if if police officers violate the civil rights of a civilian that they've been accused of killing, right? But I believe that we need to go even further. So-called black males in America need to go further and fight to make these three specific things: police brutality, police murder, and racial profiling federal crimes. And to put the message out there on paper by law that if you are an officer who was sworn to protect and serve its civilians that you will be charged federally if you commit acts such as police crime, murder, beating up of a civilian, and racial profiling. And you know what? And I've stated this years ago that the Internal Affairs Division of all these different police precincts all around America need to be disbanded too. They need to be disbanded too because IA, Internal Affairs, is nothing but human resources for these different corporations. And if you know how human resources work, you know a lot of times they're fucking corrupt as hell. You know, IA work with the police department, for the police department. A lot of times they let motherfuckers get away with such crimes. All right. What is needed is for the federal government to create a sector that replaces internal affairs in all these different police departments all across America, and really keep an eye out and monitor these different police departments to see if these different police officers are committing federal crimes against its civilians. That's what's needed. I believe that. I believe that once again, let me repeat myself. I believe that crimes such as racial profiling, police murder, and police brutality should be federal offenses. And two, I believe that the federal government needs to create a sector that replaces the Internal Affairs Division of each police precinct across America and utilize that sector as the new IA division to monitor all police precincts to see if officers from these precincts have committed federal crimes against its civilians. And I also believe a third thing. I believe that every state in the United States needs to adopt a law which states that the moment a police officer violates the rights of a civilian, that officer is no longer a cop right then and there, and that officer is now a criminal, thus should be treated as one. If these three things happen, I guarantee we'll see change when it comes to how police officers communicate and treat its citizens, regardless of the skin color of its citizens. Because when it comes to these situations, with the long history of police corruption all across America, there need to be some extreme changes. Back to Tyre Nichols, right? Back to Tyre Nichols. You know, on social media, there was a rumor that was going around where people allege that one of the former Memphis officers who was involved in the beating death of Nichols was the ex-boyfriend of Nichols' girlfriend, and allegedly pulled Nichols over out of jealousy of Nichols being the supposed new boyfriend of his ex-girlfriend, which is what caused the beating. And I think that rumor came from a few popular Twitter accounts, right? There's a few so-called Twitter activists who are popular in the website who came up with that allegation, according to the sources that I've read. And that allegation spread like wildfire to the point of the fact that so many people made videos talking about how one of these police officers was the jealous ex-boyfriend of Nichols' girlfriend at the time, which caused him to beat Nichols to death. But the father of Tyre Nichols was interviewed and basically stated that rumor is not true. He stated that allegation is not true. So, as of what's the real cause for these officers to pull over and eventually beat up Tyre Nichols will remain a mystery until I guess until this situation goes to trial. So there's a lot of details, right, that we do not yet know about this situation. Also, recently, I read an article from the New York Times where one of the biggest questions concerning the whole Tyre Nichols situation was what happened to the supervisors of these former officers. Because usually in different police precincts around the country, when there are street crime units of these departments, because the Scorpion unit of the Memphis PD was considered a quote unquote street crime unit, right? They work very closely with a superior officer who's on patrol with them, right? But in this situation, during the whole, on January 7th, when Tyre Nichols was pulled over, there were no supervisors present. So these 5 former officers, when they pulled over and beat Nichols, they were not on patrol with the supervisor. So a lot of people are asking the question of what happened to the supervisors of these street crime units. How come there was no supervisor present at that time? So, like I said, there's a whole lot of missing gaps in this situation that soon enough we may find the answer to when this situation, when the trial starts, when the trial of these 5 officers starts, and throughout the trial, we might be able to, fill in the gaps and have answers to these questions. Was the situation between the former Memphis officers and Tyre Nichols over an ex-girlfriend of one of the officers? Did this situation start off due to jealousy? How come there wasn't a supervisor that was on patrol with these officers at the time of the incident? No? And how many times have the Scorpion unit of the Memphis PD been involved in similar situations with civilians living in Memphis, Tennessee? These questions need to be answered. And like I said, we might find answers to these questions during trial. So let's see what happens. And another question would be, will the federal government actually pursue a case against these 5 or 6 or 7 former Memphis police officers involved in the beating death of Tyre Nichols? So it's a lot of questions that need answering. And like I said, we may find the answer to these questions during trial. Let's see what happens. But like I said, I still stand by what I say when it comes to what I predict to be the outcome of this situation. I think that as far as the state of Tennessee is concerned, I think that all 5 of these former Memphis police officers will be found guilty of second degree murder, aggravated assault, possibly kidnapping, and these other charges against that they committed against Tyre Nichols. But I don't think that the amount of time that they'll serve in prison will match the degree of the crime that they committed against Nichols. Unless if the federal government decide to pursue a criminal case against these 5 officers and find them guilty of violating the civil rights of Nichols, then the combination of time that these officers will serve for the state of Tennessee and for the federal government would come a little bit closer to being fair with the degree of crime that they committed against Nichols. But at the same time, my opinion still stands that these officers need to suffer something worse than prison time, if you know what I mean. But anyhow, all right, drop your comments, drop your opinions underneath the comment section. I was pretty long-winded with this, but hey, it's serious. Anyhow, peace out.